Welcome to the Union Leader Symposium Series, our Women in Engineering. So I'll get our speakers invited up here in a few minutes if they don't appear. But I first wanted to start off by thanking our sponsors, TF Moran, Peterson Engineering, and ACEC New Hampshire. We're so thankful for our sponsors help us have this platform that we're using today. I hope you all enjoyed the networking. I know it's a little bit different to get used to, but it's really fun once you get used to it, and you can bounce around by double clicking to the different tables. And a few other tips for using this. There's a chat on the side. Feel free to chat throughout the presentation. There is a Q&A tab, so if you wouldn't mind putting any questions in the Q&A tab, that would help us to keep that organized and make sure that we don't miss any questions. And then there's also, each box has 4 arrows, so that you can see my screen here. You can make that full screen if you wanted to see that bigger, or any of the boxes bigger, you could do that. So I think that was what I had here for the Remo portion of it. And then one thing I wanted to mention, each year we do a special section for Engineers Week. I've been doing that for a long time now, so I'll pop that link to it in the chat if anyone wants to check it out afterwards. It's a great section, a lot of great content in there from the engineering community, so it's a good resource to have, and hope you can check it out later. And as part of this event, we do audience polling. We started this when we were in person, and we'll continue it virtually as well. So before some of the questions that our moderator asks, we will ask you a question, and you text in your response. So what you need to do, and you can do right now, is that you need to text the word New Hampshire, which is all one word. You're going to have to auto-correct it. So text New Hampshire to 22333, and that will get you in our group. And then as the moderator is asking questions, you'll just text in ABC for your response. All the responses are anonymous. They just help us guide our panel through kind of who's in the room today and who, what is important in these different issues that we'll be talking about today. So just to give a brief introduction of who our panelists are. So we have Heidi Caproot, who's a project manager at Sanborn Head and Associates. Nikki Delude Roy, Vice President at Geo Insight. Lori Perkins, Associate Vice President at Wright Pierce. And Kristin Smith, Research Associate Professor of Sociology at Dartmouth College. And your moderator today is Joyce Levesque. She is Executive Vice President at the Union Leader, and has been moderating this panel for 3 years now. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Joyce, and we'll get Kristin, I'll get Kristin on the stage as well. So I hope you all enjoy the event.
Thank you, Stephanie. You've done just an amazing job, as she does every year. This is our 3rd year, which is exciting. And I'm always so impressed with the panelists that she finds. It's such a thoughtful group of people each and every time, and with such different ideas and really some forward thinking, which I'm so thrilled that you'll be sharing with us. So thank you very much. We got together before, obviously, so we could meet each other and spend some time, which was nice. And we had really interesting conversation, in particular on a number of topics, but especially, with this crazy year of COVID on top of, so women in engineering in COVID, with all these life crazy changes that we've all had to really address, and what it means to us overall. So it's an interesting focus this year in that discussion. And kind of to help us along with that, Kristin Smith from Dartmouth has really helped us understand some of what's happening within women in STEM, women in engineering, but from a statistical as well as research perspective too. And I found her conversations when we got together very interesting, because in particular, she used the word, or I used the word, I think a lot of people do, a work-life balance, especially associated with women in engineering and women in the workforce in general. And she said, well, how about if you think about it a little different? And I kind of reflected on that. work-life balance, I think, oh my goodness, I'm thinking Olympics and a balance beam, which I could never stand on myself, and people pulling me all over the place, and my home pulling me, the kids pulling me, and work, and she said, well, how about if you think about it as sway, work-life sway? And I thought, truly, that's really what this is all about, is this work-life sway. You're always going to have your foot in one piece or another. It's just which weight are you putting on which foot at the time, and who's needing more assistance, more help, more of you, and vice versa, what you need from them. So I found that very insightful. So Kristin, I'm looking forward for you kind of setting the stage for this discussion from a research perspective, and your thoughts on women and all that's going on right now overall within STEM and within engineering. So Kristin, if you wouldn't mind getting us started there, I think that'd be terrific.
Great, thanks. So I'm going to share my screen. I have a few slides that I've prepared. And I'm hoping, I guess you can see my whole background, huh? Let's just make this big here. Okay, thank you so much for inviting me to join your panel today. I am a sociologist at Dartmouth. I study women in work and family policy, and retention of women and minorities in STEM. And so I'm just, I've been asked to share a few thoughts with you all to get you thinking about retention of women in engineering. And I hope that you'll find that that my remarks here will sort of dovetail with the thoughts that and the questions that you'll be thinking about today during the next hour. So we've seen a lot of women entering into STEM and into engineering over the past 30 years, let's say. So in the 70s, 2% of women were working in engineering, and now it's more 22, 25%. So we've seen this steady increase. Women are majoring in engineering in college. And despite these increases of women majoring and interested in engineering, we still have these gender gaps in employment between women and men who are in engineering jobs. And so we're seeing this 8% between women and men in engineering. Women are less likely to enter engineering fields even when they have an engineering degree, and they're less likely to remain in them once they're there. So we're seeing this issue around retention. There's this big importance that has been placed on women's representation in STEM. One of the things that's really important about women entering these occupations like engineering is it encourages more women to enter engineering. It also diversifies the leadership. It expands the access to mentoring for those who are in engineering. And it also it reduces the gender wage gap. So engineering jobs, as you all know, are higher paid than other jobs. They have benefits. These are what sociologists and others would call good jobs. And so the more we have women in good jobs, the more that women will be paid, and we can reduce the gender wage gap. But there are these issues. I mean, I think I was just in one of those tables speaking with some of the attendees here, and they were talking about, retention's a big issue. The woman I was speaking with was saying, she's one of the only women who have maintained their position in engineering among a cadre of women that she knew. So what are some of the issues surrounding retention? And you probably all know these, but work and family balance, or sway, is one of those things that women cite as reasons for leaving the labor force. Work history, overwork. This is a field where 40 hours per week is sort of a standard, and actually 50 hours or 60 hours is really a more of a sort of a regularity. And so, these high demands of time can make it challenging for those who have caregiving needs, men and women alike, right? There's discrimination. We still have discrimination in hiring, promotions, and earnings, and pay, and the chilly climate. So we've seen a lot of reporting from the media on the chilly workplace. So they're talking about things like sexual harassment, the old boys network that makes it harder for women to understand sort of the workplace, the lack of workplace flexibility, and gendered social norms are still playing a big part in retention. I just want to talk a little bit more about gendered organizations. So a lot of our organizations, our workplaces, are gendered. They're predicated on this outdated notion of work and family life. So they're built on this notion of an ideal worker. And an ideal worker is someone who can devote their time and energy to the workplace 50, 60 hours a week. And they can do this because they have a wife at home, or they have someone at home. So the idea is this ideal worker doesn't have to concern themselves with anything except for work. But that's really not how our families have evolved over time. So we've had these changes in the family, but we haven't had these changes, these concurrent changes in our organizations and the expectations and the gender role expectations for women and men. So we have these formal policies in our organizations that make it a challenge for those who have caregiving responsibilities, like rigid start and stop times. If you have to be at work at 8 a.m., but you have children and they need to be at school at 8 a.m., that makes it really tricky for them to be able to balance that. Other formal policies could be paid leave or job flexibility. But then there's also these informal policies in this workplace climate. And as I mentioned before, like long work hours would be sort of an informal policy, or stigma surrounding the use of paid leave policies. So you may have these paid leave policies, these great policies, but there's a stigma attached to using them. And so these are things to think about when we're thinking about why women might leave the organization. And so we've seen with COVID-19 and the pandemic, the real life implications of these gendered organizations and these gender roles at work, but also at home. In September, 865,000 women left the labor force. These are jobs that were ended. These are women who decided that they couldn't balance. The sway was just not working for them. There was no sway. There was just school closures, daycare closures, and they couldn't manage. And so perhaps some of your organizations have seen women leaving the labor force, or parents leaving the labor force right now. There are negative implications for job exits for anyone. So your earnings over your lifetime decrease, your retirement savings decreases. More immediate, your family economic stability is put into question. So the pandemic has really hit women very hard, and women at all levels of jobs have reduced their work hours and also left the labor force. So one of the things that I like to think about is, how do we facilitate re-entering the labor force? And typically there aren't very many on-ramps for women to re-enter once they've left the labor force, to come in at that same level in that same type of job. Typically it's at lower earnings or lower hours. Teaching is something that a lot of women turn to who are engineers, and they're not able to do their engineering job, but then they can find that balance with teaching. And then these on-ramps can increase they can decrease the gender wage gap. So I'm thinking about how, the pandemic is hopefully ending soon with vaccinations being more widely distributed. So is this a turning point? And can we think about what we've changed and how we've incorporated some of these changes into our work lives that may have made it facilitated work? So I call it the work at home experiment, right? So those of us who are fortunate enough to have been able to work at home throughout this pandemic, will we keep some of that? Will employers value that? Maintaining a foot in the door. So if you've had to leave the labor force, are there ways that you can maintain just even a toe in the door through training or talking to an employer about long-term leave? And then, what about climate? Have there been some pushbacks on climate through this pandemic? Are we seeing some easing of stigma as more and more people are needing to take paid leave to either care for themselves or for others? I see sort of this national awakening about workers and caregivers, that workers are also caregivers, seeing the role of the essential worker, for example. And I believe we're about to embark on a large discussion, a national discussion about paid leave, paid family leave and childcare as work supports for parents and caregivers. The infrastructure bill that I believe will be coming shortly from the new administration is really about shoring up supports as workers are resources. So those are the remarks that I've prepared. I'm more than happy to talk with people after. You can contact me. I do research on women and work and retention in STEM, not just engineering, but broadly speaking. That's all I have.
Thank you. I'm trying to come back in here, so hang on one second. My camera is not cooperating. There we go. All right. Thank you, Kristin. It's been so interesting hearing your remarks and truly what the question is going to be as we move forward. The answers to those questions that you pose, I'd be very curious what you do find and, to hear what in fact or how you would be publishing this information, because it's something I'd like to know more about as we move forward. So thank you very much. That's terrific. So I guess I'll go to the panel and ask them in a single word, how would you describe your experience in our COVID culture for 2020, both personally and professionally? And then what do you think is going to be happening coming up in 2021? I wonder if maybe, Nikki, you might want to start us off with that if possible.
Great, thank you. I'm super thrilled to be here today. So thank you for inviting me, Joyce, and others. And so great to be on this panel with these amazing women. Kristin, I feel like you teed up this so incredibly well with your presentation. So thank you so much. And I have always talked about work-life balance being something that I view in a long-term lens, that I can't look at it very short-term because it never feels like in balance. So the idea of work-life sway just is a perfect way to describe the way I've always thought about that. So to your question, Joyce, one word that describes 2020, my word is flexible, both personally and professionally. I think we can talk a little bit more on the professional side, but I'll speak personally for a second. I have two teenage daughters, a junior and a senior in high school. Mm-hmm. So, they were much more independent than a lot of my employees who had younger kids, and the pressure and expectation and stress that came along with trying to homeschool younger kids is very different. My teenagers went from social butterflies to isolated I don't know, worms withering on the vine. And all of the emotional ups and downs that came along with not being able to socialize at a time when, that's the goal, right? Is trying to learn to be independent, and they weren't able to do that. And so struggled through all of that this past year and realized that I couldn't react or overreact to anything. We had just to be really flexible and to sway back and forth and let emotions kind of happen and adjust to them. So flexible is my personal word, but it also very much applies in my role at GeoInsight. So just for a quick introduction, GeoInsight's a 60-person geotechnical and environmental engineering firm here in Manchester. We have offices in Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Maine as well. And so we've got a small, very committed workforce, and COVID hit every single one of our employees in some way, right? And we had to adjust to very personal situations, whether that was someone who needed to become a caregiver for an older parent because they pulled them out of a long-term care facility, whether that was, a parent who had all of a sudden had to homeschool their child and was still, had the very intense 60+ hour demands on their time, and that work didn't go away, right? Thankfully, that's the good news on the business side. So we just really had to approach each individual issue and situation with a lot of flexibility. And it really did shatter some of the sort of formal policies that Kristin alluded to. I think we had a culture of you're in your office every day, certain hours of the day. And, not only did our employees start to work very interesting hours and very dynamic hours, but we also had clients who were doing the same things. So I had, an attorney client who basically said, don't talk to me between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. I'm available before 10 and after 3. So, it was being flexible both with our own staff and our own schedules, but also those schedules of our clients. So I could ramble for a little bit, but I'll turn it over to Heidi, and we'll just keep the conversation going.
Yeah,
Great.
absolutely. Thank you, Nikki. And it's really great to see you guys all again. I'm really excited to be on this panel with each and every one of you and learn from you as well, kind of as I'm newer into my career. I guess a little bit of background. I've been in the professional industry for about 8 years, started at Sanborn Head right out of college, been there ever since. So for my word, there's a lot of different words that come to mind when I think of 2020, but if I had to choose one, so personally, it would be challenging. And professionally, I would say perseverance. And so my reasoning for that is I personally struggle with change in general, but the uncertainty that came with 2020 was very hard for me. I also, anybody that knows me, I'm a very social person. So the worm you were describing, Nikki, was kind of what I was feeling in isolation. So I was struggling with the parts of my job that I love so much are being able to work with fantastic people and bounce ideas off, and trying to figure out how to do that now in an isolated state, not being able to see friends and family. It was just very taxing on me, and trying to adapt to that was hard. And then also comes with the distractions of now working from home and trying to find that work-life balance or that work-life sway. And do I focus all my attention on I really want to do laundry right now and I'm right there, I could probably start it, or no, you need to focus on work, and then it's dinner, maybe I should just go check my email, and then 3 hours later I'm still working and just go from the office to the bedroom. So just trying to find that was all very, very challenging for me personally. And so why I say perseverance professionally is even though I struggled, I feel like we did adapt very fast. I feel like Sanborn Head kind of recognized that this was a concern right off. We all went remote a little over a year ago now, and just kind of figuring out together how we can make this work, and the flexible schedules that Nikki was talking about, and people working off hours, implementing Microsoft Teams way earlier than we thought we were going to just make sure we could find ways to get people connected, and still move forward and do our jobs successfully.
Great. Lori, what are your words?
Yeah, for 2020, personally, my word is pivot. It was, as the days unfolded when COVID started, and then weeks, and then months, it just seemed like every day we were trying to figure out what direction do we go in with the kids, with what they needed. And by way of background for me, I do have two children. They are 9 and 10 years old. So, one of them's in middle school. So an important time of his life to be active in school and not being able to do that. So it just seemed like day in and day out, it was addressing the problem at hand and pivoting and adapting to it to be successful, and really showing the kids how to do that. At work, I lead a group of about 18 people. So in terms of the professional side, there was a lot of difficulty there, just all of us in different locations at home, not being able to see each other every day. And so my word professionally was, for the year, mediocre. I just felt like I didn't have the same tools by being side by side with my staff to help them by rubbing elbows and getting work done together and learning things together at the same time. So professionally, it was just a tough year. I definitely thrive on being with people and seeing my clients. And I traveled a lot, so not being able to travel anymore and do the training I usually do was a huge impact to being home every day. And as I stand here in my office today, I'm very happy to be back. So, and looking to 2021, my words again between personal and professional are renewed and revived. I'm excited that folks are starting to come back to the office. We have tons of tools in place to stay connected. Our company has been extremely supportive with different activities to help us all stick together through this, and hoping everybody comes back with this renewal and revived energy to continue the success we've had.
Great. Thank you, Lori. This is great. Interesting all the way around. And I'm thinking that right now it's probably a good time for a poll question, especially with the next question coming up that we'll be talking about. And this one, if you do the text to New Hampshire 22333, you can answer the poll. That'd be terrific. And I think Stephanie will pull that one up for us as well. But the question here is, how supported have you felt by your organization in 2020? Were you fully supported, moderately supported, or really not at all? So we'll be curious to see how you all feel 2020 went for you with your organization. And then maybe circling back with Heidi, what's one thing in your organization that's had a positive impact on employees, including yourself, of course, since March of last year. I mean, we've been in this a year now. So what has your organization done, Heidi, and what have you done for your folks overall? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so there's a couple different things that actually come to mind on this. And one of them is, I will say, I feel like I've actually been able to connect a little bit more with people outside of my normal team. And we have several offices across the country, and we've been doing a lot more virtual events that have kind of brought in the entire company. So I feel like I've actually been able to connect more with our folks out in Colorado or in Pennsylvania because of that, because of COVID, actually, which has been great. I mentioned earlier that we rolled out kind of right off the bat. Sanborn had increased our VPN network to allow everybody to work from home and have that capability. We rolled out Teams very quickly so that we could all stay connected. We've also started doing, my team does like a weekly call on Mondays where we just really talk about what we did that weekend. And it's kind of like if you were to go to the water cooler or fill up your coffee and you run into somebody in the kitchen and you want to chat, just to kind of feel like you still have that presence there. So it's been really great seeing how creative too. There's been a lot of creativity on ways to keep employees engaged. We do virtual happy hours, virtual paint and sips, virtual escape rooms, just things I never would have thought of. So I've been kind of really impressed with the creativity and those kind of outreaches to keep employees engaged. I think another really important thing, and I think this ties into a lot of what Kristin was talking about and what we're probably going to continue to talk about, is the flexibility and recognizing the importance of flexible schedules, and that 9 to 5 doesn't always work for everybody, and especially in a situation like this. I'll get emails at random times throughout the day just because people are working schedules that work for them, and that's been like, it's more acceptable, it seems, now. And so, yeah, I think that.
Great. That's terrific. Really good insight. Thank you. Lori, how about you? What's your organization doing, and what are you doing for your employees?
Well, we had a lot of costume contests. I have to say, I enjoyed seeing our CFO in a tutu. That was one of my favorite parts. But there were a lot of different activities through virtual meetings that we've held. And I think one of my favorites was we did have happy hours where we were meeting weekly to talk about updates about COVID. But then those meetings turned into an opportunity for tons of other people throughout the firm to present projects that they were working on. And with 275 plus people at Wright Pierce, you don't always know what's going on in someone else's state or what project they're working on. So it was a really great way to learn what other staff members were involved in and some of the cool projects that we were doing. We had water cooler chats where we would just schedule 15 to 30 minutes on people's calendars within each office. And you could just log in and chit chat like you would if you were standing outside your office at the water cooler. So a lot of understanding, a lot more just types of ways through Teams and the virtual meetings to connect with each other, and kept it fun, kept it lighthearted.
That's great. I mean, I'd love to see that. Someone in a tutu, that'd be great. And a dope. Not at the ballet. Much better. Oh, that's hilarious. Good. How about you, Nikki? What you got going on?
Well, at the moment, I'm taking notes for future activities.
Get that tutu ready.
Exactly. So, very much the same. We took on Teams very quickly, which was a really brand new platform for us. We hadn't ever had a communication tool like that, so that worked really well. We have Tim, who's our IT god. He really kept us running and transitioned us very successfully to all remote, including our CAD folks and those who have a lot of data needs, and that was successful. So a lot of the same things. One of the things that we also did was initiate virtual town halls every Monday afternoon. And although initially that was sort of a top-down presentation, for the first month or so when we kind of thought this might be short-lived, it was just an opportunity to keep talking to everybody. We quickly transitioned that into more of an opportunity for staff to present on a project that they were working on, or an opportunity that they had heard about, or a virtual presentation that they had sat in on. So it really became much more of an opportunity for us to share information and just talk to each other, where quite frankly, we had some geographic silos prior to COVID. So that's been a really positive change for us, and one that I don't think was very deliberate, but it just kind of happened. It broke down a lot of those geography barriers that were there before. And then we thought a lot about how best to support the staff, especially those staff who have kids at home and are trying to homeschool and trying to make the hours work. And so certainly, like I said earlier, it kind of shattered those formal expectations around schedule, but we also took a look at our health insurance options. And so historically, if you were a 40-hour employee, you had access to our insurance at one rate. And then if you were a reduced hour employee, you would have access to the insurance at a different rate. And we actually, for COVID, kind of relaxed that. And so we allowed staff to reduce their hours while still accessing sort of the full health benefit and the full support of the company. If they reduced their hours, we didn't necessarily, or we allowed the company to take on the same share of the insurance burden that we would have if they had been a full-time employee, and kind of trying to look at policies like that where we could allow and really support some flexibility, and recognizing that staff weren't voluntarily reducing their hours to 32 hours because they wanted to go hiking on the weekend or have an extra day off, right? They were really doing it trying to support their families. And so that was a big change for us. We did a couple of policy changes like that to try to be real about our support with regards to those reduced hours and that flexibility.
That's great. I mean, just that whole climate piece that Kristin was talking to originally, that's terrific. Interesting to hear. Stephanie, I'm not sure if the poll is working or not, but I'm not seeing anything coming up there. I'm not sure if it's refreshing or not, but I figure I'm going to just jump on to the next poll question in case, and we could always go back if we need to. But so the next poll question is, have you left the workforce since March of 2020? And if you have, yes or no, or maybe are you considering leaving? Are you considering staying? So It's an interesting question. Is it because of, caring for a loved one at home? Is it taking care of the kids in school? Is it, is it your spouse? So I guess the question now, maybe starting with Lori, if you could answer or give us some insight on, how many of your engineers have left your firm for family care reasons, men or women, and what are your plans to get them back into the firm so you don't lose that? I mean, that retention piece that Kristin was speaking to being so important, and how hard it is to get people is so important too.
So important. I would say, honestly, we haven't lost a lot of people that weren't already planning, moms that were having children that already had planned to leave. I would say it was opposite. If they already had the plans to leave, and they still wanted to do some work, we made sure that we had a plan set up so that they could do the work. And I think in terms of folks thinking about leaving and rejoining, my number one recommendation would be to work with your employer to come up with a plan to stay somehow active within the firm or your company in doing some kind of work. Because the work for finding the right people is so hard right now. I think every firm that I talk to, we're always trying to hire good people, and it's just hard to hire the number of people with the amount of work that we have in this industry, which is a great thing. So we don't want to lose anybody.
Right.
We would rather talk through a plan to figure out how to keep the person working when they want to on their schedule and until they come back, so they can come back.
So a customized kind of back and forth each
Yes.
person?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, fascinating. Do you feel that so that retention, that's going to obviously retain people and certainly keep the talent with your firm?
Absolutely. I mean, and we know now, thank you to COVID in one way, most people don't want to thank COVID, but we know it works. We know people can work successfully from home. We had, a phenomenal year and got a lot done. And so there's no question about that anymore. It's when, not if, we're going to consider allowing people to do more work from home. And in the situation of trying to keep, moms or dads that are required to handle their kids, we would make up a plan to figure that out and keep them on board.
Yeah, that's terrific. Nikki, what are you folks doing on that piece of it? What do you feel? If you've had people who have left or have chosen to leave or modify their working climate, or what are you all doing?
Yeah. So thankfully, because Lori's exactly right. Right now, it's very hard to find good people in our industry, and so when we do, I think we all try to hold on with death grips. So thankfully, we haven't lost anyone. We've certainly had a number of staff adjust their schedules and reduce hours from 40 to 32, or even 40 to 20, or something like that, to do some caregiving, and whether that's through COVID time or a true reduction in hours, that's a very personal sort of experience and approach. But, I just want to acknowledge kind of the business side of things here for a second, because we, as engineers in this field, we don't command the level of markup that other businesses do, right? Even if I was doing software, there's a lot of markup and a lot of profit. But for us in our industry, if we make a 10% profit, that's a really good year. And typically, 7 to 8 to 12% is kind of the range that we're working in. And so the margins are really, really close. And so to the point that Kristin made early on, there are some really sort of informal practices that make our business work. The long hours are part of the expectation and the fabric of what we do. And so there are some real challenges to how to make sure that we retain staff and recognize that this business puts a lot of pressure on our staff and expects a lot of them. We don't expect a 40-hour week. We expect a 45-hour week, right? And we expect that whether you have household sort of duties or not, that the client asks for something and it has to get out the door and meet that client's expectation. Otherwise, we end up losing that client and that margin gets even finer. So this is a really tough business to do what we do in. And so to that point, I think we've just been very deliberate about trying to ask staff what we can do to help, how can we help, and then being real about trying to make sure that that works. And it's, I think for me, in my perspective, it's really about shattering all of those formal expectations and just really trying to personalize how we work with our individual staff members. And hopefully we're doing a good job at that, but it's just a constant challenge, and it's about being flexible and nimble as an organization so that we can keep our staff, because they are really few and far between good staff. And once you've trained them and got them in the culture, losing them is really tough.
Absolutely. And you've got right, holding on to them. They're such an asset. You don't want to lose these people who have got so much talent. Finding them, training them, going through all that again is so difficult. So completely agree. Heidi, how about you? Anybody leaving in your group or?
No, so I kind of echo what Lori and Nikki say. I don't have too much to add, and we've been fortunate to not really have lost people. Similar, a lot of people kind of maybe changing schedules, or I think we had a couple people who have taken like a couple weeks leave and but planning on coming back, but nobody that's left the industry. I guess interestingly enough, from my perspective, not necessarily people leaving due to COVID, but I have seen just kind of in my short time people leaving, specifically women, the consulting industry. And just kind of going back to what Kristin was talking about in the beginning about looking for those flexible hours. And again, echoing what Lori and Nikki have said, is that I think one positive that has come out of COVID is that we've proved that like flexible schedules can work and technology can keep us connected. I think there was always maybe this negative connotation about if you work from home, you're not going to really be as connected with everybody else in the industry or in your company. Or I know we had talked about this when we met before, about there was even some kind of guilt about I'm going to leave the office to take my hour-long lunch break. Like, should I be doing that? But I think those have, I like that what you said, Nikki, they've been shattered. Those expectations have been shattered. We've proven that we can make flexible schedules work. So if you are somebody who's thinking about leaving, I agree. I encourage you to talk to your employer, because I think that it can be worked around, and you can stay connected even if you're working remotely. I think a lot of people will probably continue to work remotely.
I agree. I think that makes it, it's going to be very interesting. I'm wondering too, from a business perspective, what that's going to mean for the commercial markets coming in too. So, commercial leasing in office space and what have you. So kind of interesting overall. I see Stephanie.
Hi. So I'm not sure why my screen wasn't sharing. I'll try a different thing the next time, but I do have the results, so I just wanted to pass those along. So for the first question, 75% of the people said they were felt fully supported, 18% were moderately supported, and 7% did not feel supported at all.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then this most recent question, 11% left the workforce, 86% did not, and 3% did not but considered it.
Good.
So apologize on the screen thing. I'm going to try a different thing for the next one. Sorry.
That's great. We love seeing your smiling face. Come visit us. That's great. So no, that's great. Thank you very much. Interesting to see those responses and how it does reflect and make a change to what we're thinking about too. So and talking about. So I guess we've got to add one more poll question here, and it's: do you feel like you have a good handle on your work-life balance in 2021? Has that changed? Have you changed that balance? And the answers are definitely some days, and nope. I'm still challenged with that, and gosh knows it's so difficult at this point. But so Heidi, at this point, what does the term work-life balance mean to you, and how's that changed in the last 12 months?
Yeah. So
right.
It's funny. Work-life balance is always something I've always tried to like strive for, but it's been kind of hard to define what that looked like. And I mentioned this a little bit, I think, in the beginning. For me, when I started working from home, I had no idea what it looked like. I struggled really hard with trying to find when I should be working, when I should be like doing home things. I mean, before COVID started, I would I made a really valiant effort about when I leave the office, I'm done. When I go home, I'm home. I focus on home. I focus on like my family and whatnot. When the two of them kind of came into one space, it was much harder for me to figure out what that looked like. Again, like I mentioned before, I would wake up, immediately come to my office, and I would have dinner, then immediately go back to the office and just trying to figure out what I should be doing when was challenging for me. So I think, again, I keep going back to the flexibility part, but like now I find myself taking more breaks just to kind of get up from my desk. I hike a lot more, I go for walks, and that's okay. I'm getting my work done. I'm finding a schedule that works for me, recognizing when I need a break, especially with isolation and being in the same space all the time. And I think that's kind of been my challenge, and what I've really worked on the last year is just recognizing that it's okay to like step away from your computer. I don't need to be glued to my desk just because it's in the same space that I'm in all the time.
Right. And that's a good point, isn't it? It'd be interesting too to see, is there different things that companies could offer to individuals who are struggling with this? What are the different options that we could potentially be able to provide for individuals who do struggle with how to break that up? It's really tough. It is really tough. Lori, how about you? What are your thoughts on it?
I love this question because it's, the work-life balance. I think I shared with you guys before. I traveled a lot, in 2020, and my work-life balance was mostly work. I missed out on a lot, and having COVID hit and not being able to travel, not that I don't want to travel, but I definitely know I don't want to and don't need to travel as much as I was. And so I feel like my work-life balance has switched to a life-work balance where life comes first because it had to, with the kids being home and trying to adapt to the days that they even now still have remote, even though they're primarily in school. When something comes through and somebody has a case, then they're home doing remote. And if that's the case, there's two of them, my husband's at home, but I will support him and I will work from home so that we got both of them covered one way or another. And in that regard, I feel bad for single parents because it's just not easy dealing with remote learning from home, even with two parents. So for me, I'm a definite, this whole last year, I feel like I finally have my life back into the balance, and looking forward, I know what I should and shouldn't be doing in terms of travel. And I feel like, again, less guilt, and it's okay because I had to do it. I had to adapt. And now I know I can still get my job done and still be helping people without taking too much sacrifice out on my family, truthfully.
That's great. That's really terrific. And that's very insightful. I mean, culturally, within the organization, do you feel that the organization itself, the company itself, is going to be accepting of that as things do come back to somewhat of a semi-normal post-COVID environment?
I do. Honestly, I had support even during the time that they knew I was traveling a lot, and they knew, how difficult it was for me at times. And we've actually had a great push in hiring the right people that I need in certain offices and in certain states. So because of that, and building them up and helping them take on some of the additional work, then I won't need to travel as much. So a lot of support there.
That's great. That's terrific to hear. Nikki, what are your thoughts?
So I feel like I'm exactly between Heidi and Lori in this. So I got a COVID puppy. So that was a no.
The girls weren't enough. You needed a puppy too?
Right. Well, and so, yes. So my girls are with me 50% of the time. So there are weeks when it's all of us and there's lots of energy. And then there are weeks where it was literally just me. And so I found myself struggling, as Heidi's articulated, at the beginning, where I, roll out of bed and there's my computer and I go to work at, 6:30 and then grab breakfast and then come back. And I find myself, I'm still working at 6:30, 7:30, 8 o'clock at night, because it's right there. And so I really struggled with that. The puppy helped because I'm now hiking in the middle of the day and feeling okay about that when the sun is shining, and letting myself, I think, feel that lack of guilt around those kinds of moments and taking them as I can. And also to the point that Lori made, I'm also a lot more available for my girls. They're high school kids, and so normally before pre-COVID, I guess we were calling it, I would be out of the house before they go to school, and I'd be home after they come home. And now I'm there for a few minutes before breakfast or while they're eating breakfast, and I get that 5 or 10 minutes of grumpy FaceTime in the morning with them, which I appreciate.
True.
and I'm there when they get home from school, and I'm able to connect with them, and I'm taking those moments and very much being appreciative for having those, and not feeling guilty about taking those and really kind of being in them for a half an hour and then going back to work. So I'm kind of using the flexibility a little bit differently, and really valuing what COVID's the positive side of COVID for us in terms of the life part of the balance.
That's so true. Looking at that positive side means so much, and learning from this, certainly negative experience, but just what we've all learned from that in this past year. That's very insightful. Thank you. So I'm looking at the poll, and do you feel like you have a good handle on work-life balance? And 65% or 50-50. That's great. 16% definitely. Boy, we're a well-adjusted group, I must say. So I'm in the 19%. Nope, I'm still kind of like, wow, where are we? As you see, I'm at work too. So that's very insightful. Thanks. Good. I guess, Lori, if maybe on a final note here, or a final question, what do you think the organizations should be focusing on in 2021? What is it that we should focus on, and what should organizations focus on to retain employees in the workforce and improve the workforce climate?
I guess I'll go first. Lori, unless you want to go?
No, go ahead, Nikki.
Okay. So I'm actually really excited to see what 2020, what the expectations of employees are going to be going forward. I think we've been pretty hesitant. I think someone brought up office space a minute ago, but we've been pretty hesitant to try to reduce office space or do anything dramatic, because I do expect that at some point when life returns to what I'll say normal is, right? When kids are back in school in the fall and there to stay, and it's not this bounce back and forth because there's some cases, and that feels more predictable. I expect that employees are probably going to take a breath and be like, oh, cool, I'm home and I'm still working really well. And then maybe there's a point where they want to have more access to the office. And I suspect that we're going to have a little bit of a pendulum when everybody kind of readjusts. And so for 2021, I just think we're going to need to continue to be flexible and let people kind of find that new normal and get adjusted to whatever that is and what feels best for them. And as employers, we're going to need to continue just to be responsive to that and be understanding that not everyone's going to want the same thing at the same time just because, they got a vaccine or their kids are back in school, that there's probably going to be some longer term adjustment that we're going to need to let happen.
That's great. Yeah. And it's interesting because you circled right back around on your first comment on flexibility, that being your word. It's fascinating. That's going to continue on, right?
Right. That is my one word.
That's exactly what I was going to say too, you said it, Nikki, was flexibility. I think our companies need to be even more flexible because now we know things can be different and everybody's situation is different. I also think one of the big things to focus on is a continued attention to each of us as employees and understanding and that whole togetherness again, because we all just went through a pandemic that we've never been through, and we're still learning from that. And many of us are coming out changed people, and it's not going to be flip a switch and we're back to normal and everybody just get back to work and do the things we used to do. There will be a new normal, and with that comes changed people, and there needs to be a continued focus. It's not just going to stop right on Labor Day after the kids go back to school and everybody's expected to be like they were and on March 9th of 2020. So that to me the togetherness needs to continue forward.
That's great. Good. Heidi, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, kind of piggybacking on what Nikki and Lori said is I think organizations need to recognize it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all type of approach for everybody. I think there might be some people that are absolutely thriving working remotely, and that's what they want to do continuing. I also anticipate a lot of people would love to do some kind of a hybrid situation where they're working part-time in the office, part-time at home. I mean, I'm personally doing that right now, and it's made significant improvements for me from completely isolated, and I do kind of enjoy some days at home too. So I think it's going to be recognizing that. And again, it ties back to the flexibility part, is that on an individual level, we're all going to need and want something different. And can prove that that can be successful. I also think it's going to be important to continue to focus on engagement, especially for individuals that are working those. I mean, we can't, like Lori said, you can't just flip a switch and go back to how it was. Being able to adapt things to now incorporate people that are in the office, people that are home, people that are in between, to kind of make sure that we're all still in this together type of thing.
Yeah, that's really good.
Joyce, if I can just add one thing,
Please.
Lori's idea of we're a changed people too. I just wanted to touch on one thing that hasn't come up, which is, as far as I'm concerned personally, I haven't been directly impacted by COVID, and we've been very lucky from our group of employees, that we haven't had a whole lot of impact. But I do want to recognize that a lot of people have been impacted by COVID, either by having it themselves and struggling with the long-term impacts, sort of health challenges with that, or having had that impact their family in some way, in a pretty direct way. And so I think that just goes to that whole idea of flexibility and change that Lori brought up, and the idea of, one size does not fit all going forward that Heidi brought up, because we also have to recognize the real impact that COVID had on a lot of people, and recognize that there may be folks dealing with health issues and having to be flexible because they just can't come back to work full time for one reason or another. So.
Thank you, Nikki. That's great. Kristin, I'm going to put you on the spot for a minute, just because I'm curious, in your research, what are you finding in relation to maybe organizations or employees and what they're looking for moving forward in 2021?
Yeah, so that is the question, right? Is how does this all play out? And the most frustrating thing about research is data, right? So you have to wait for things to happen before you can analyze the data. So I will be looking at these questions. I would love to field a study of engineers in New Hampshire. That would be very cool to take a look at how organizations are changing and how employees are changing. There's national data that will be out there, but that always takes a little longer to come in. So yeah, I have, this is one of my topics, so I'll hopefully be able to answer these questions in a year or so.
That'd be great. That'll be terrific. It'll be very interesting to see this. Well, I want to thank each and every one of you. It's been such a pleasure visiting with you, getting to know you and understand, your organizations and what you've been doing personally as well. So I thank you very, very much. Stephanie, I know, is saying at this point that, if you want to stick around and talk with folks, certainly this is open for the next 15 minutes or so. So please feel free to do so. And again, we thank you so very much. A pleasure to meet all of you. Thank you.